So at some point in 2019, I made the step to real-world racing, and I did this through a racing school in Sebring, Florida. Now, I'd figured out a loophole with the system where, in America, you have to go through a basic and an advanced racing school, each of which are about 2 days long and usually cost around $3,500. But I'd figured out that if I flew back to the UK and took my racing license there, I could skip the basic racing school and save myself about $3,000. So I flew back to the UK and I took my ARDS test at Alton Park, and I scraped through the exam because I'd never driven a car with the gear lever on the left. So I barely scraped through that, and I flew back to the US and went threw myself in at the deep end, going straight to the advanced racing school. So the first time I ever sat in a racing car was Sebring, Florida, at some point in 2019, and I turned up on day one and then spent the rest of the day trying not to shit myself. So just clinging on, trying not to die, going in circles, just hoping I didn't mess it up. And so at the end of day one, I was 4 seconds off the pace. I was absolutely nowhere. So I went away and then I came back the next day, and I started to take a step back and look at what I was doing and apply the same skills that I'd learned in esports. And that's when it all started to flow and the confidence started to come. So over the course of day two, I built up the confidence, and the lap time built and built and built. And I ended day two 0.02 of a second faster than the IndyCar driver setting the reference laps. So with my 3 hours of experience over 2 days, I decided I was ready to go racing. And a month later, I booked myself a flight to the Mid-Ohio Sports Car course. Now, I got on this flight with $6,000 in my bank account, which was all the money I'd ever earned, and also a few $1,000s of my granddad's money, which I was holding on to for him, and he still doesn't know that I've spent to this day. And I got on this flight for a $11,000 racing weekend. So, as I'm flying to Ohio, I pull out my iPhone and I start scrambling together some kind of pitch. And I'm thinking, how can I offer something? How can I pay for this race weekend? How can I make this work? So about 35,000 feet up, I started my first business. So then I landed in Ohio, and the next morning I go straight to the track on practice day and I make a beeline for the owner of the racing series. And over the next 10 minutes, I pitched, I begged, I offered every cent I had in my account, and somehow they offered me the drive. So I jump into the car, elated, I signed damage waivers I knew I couldn't afford, and over the next few days, I went to work and learnt everything that I possibly could. I studied every competitor, I harassed coaches for feedback, I did everything I could to make it worth the trip and make it worth the risk that I had taken. So come the races, we ended up qualifying 10th, 6th and 6th, and we finished the races 4th, 2nd and 12th, although I have an excuse for the last one with a gearbox issue. So I'd risked everything on this trip, I'd thrown everything at it, and I'd come away with a trophy to show for it. So in my head, I'd made it, I was a racing driver. Unfortunately, over the next few months, my season went off track. I'd spent every cent that I earned, every cent that I had on that first race weekend, and I couldn't afford the next 5 weekends. So I realized the only way that I was going to pay for it was by doing a deal with the racing series, and though I offered something worth far more than the value of the seat, unfortunately they decided not to work with me. So over the next few months, I scrambled together and did everything I could to pull together the sponsorship, but unfortunately nothing could make a dent in the cost of the season. So my season went a bit off track.